Bayside Folsom, how y'all doing today? Give it up for that worship team if you would. These guys crushed it. Welcome everybody to church. You having a good Memorial Day weekend? Yeah, everybody joining online. Turn around, everybody. Say hi to all those people joining online. Great to see you all. Glad you're here. Like 2 of you turned around. You don't care. But the people online, you're going, get into the room. Get into the room. My name is Brian, one of the pastors around here. Really, really good to be with you. Grab your Bible, if you would, and open it to the book of Acts, chapter 27. Acts, chapter 27. We're winding down our study of the book of Acts. I asked ChatGPT to roast my preaching the other day. And don't do it, please. It's kind of embarrassing, but I don't know how it knows this, but it came back to me and it said, there you are asking people to open their Bibles while you preach off an iPad without a Bible even in the room, in front of you. You know, like, come on. Like, how does it know that? It's watching the videos. What in the world? Grab your sermon notes out. It might be a thing or two you want to jot down. Anybody know who this is? Sully. That's exactly right. It's Sully Sullenberger. If you remember back all the way to 2009, raise your hand if you weren't even alive in 2009. Some people. Captain Sullenberger made what really seemed like an impossible decision, right? To land a crippled U.S. Airways passenger jet, an Airbus. It was not a Boeing, it was an Airbus, with 155 souls aboard. Where? In the Hudson River, right? And isn't it funny, like, you get on a plane and they do a little safety briefing, the whole thing, and the flight attendants are always like, in case of a water landing, they call it, in case of a water landing, and every time it goes through my head, I'm like, there's no such thing as a water landing. That's called a crash, actually, right? This thing is not made to land on the water. If it's a float plane, okay, but this is not made to land on a road. That's a crash. To really crash this plane gently in the Hudson River was his decision. Why? Well, because there were no engines. They'd been taken out, both engines had been taken out by a flock of terrorist Canada geese. It knocked them offline. There was no runway, no chance that he was going to be able to glide as far as he would have needed to glide to make it to a runway. So all he had was practiced skill, sheer instinct, thousands of hours of flying experience, and this brownish, greenish ribbon of a river running through the heart of New York City. And what? It worked, didn't it? Right? Remember this iconic photograph? Imagine the splash. Yes, absolutely. Like, geez. Imagine that splash. It worked. And what do you think a seasoned airline captain like Sully does after landing a commercial airliner full of 155 passengers does, right, when he lands, right? Is it the first decision, like, should Liam Neeson or Tom Hanks play me in the movie that they'll eventually make about the whole thing? Now, some people might have done that, but not Sully. He wasn't thinking about hero status. He wasn't replaying the perfect water landing in his mind. It was nowhere on his radar. Instead, you know the thing he did. He took a single moment. He collected himself. He picked up the PA microphone in the cockpit, ordered everyone to what? Get out of the airplane, evacuate the airplane. It was taking on water very, very rapidly. He unbuckled himself. He made sure that First Officer Skiles could also unbuckle himself. They opened the cockpit door, and they started to walk the aisle. Not once, but twice. Counting souls on board, making sure that every single person who was on that plane got off that plane. Sullenberger later said, my focus was on the people. I had to be certain that the people were safe. I was responsible for the people. And that, like, resonates with us, doesn't it? Why does that resonate with us? Because that's the very picture that faithful leadership portrays. When life goes badly, when the stressors of life are at their peak, when the storms of life are raging, it's not supposed to just be about looking out for oneself. Instead, all of life is supposed to be about stepping up and stepping out on behalf of others, isn't it? And that's the thing that our world needs more than anything right now, right? Because so much of this world is all about looking out for who? Big numero uno. I'm just looking out for number one. Just cut your losses. Just save yourself. Just stay dry. Don't get involved. But the truth is, nobody changes the world by minding their own business, do they? Heard a story in the lobby in between services. A friend of mine was telling me about how his pickup got broken into, all of his tools. He's a contractor. All of his tools wiped out of his pickup, gone. Every bit of it gone, 5:15 in the morning. I said, where was your pickup parked? Like, some bad part of town? He's like, no, it was parked in front of my neighbor's house, like right over there. I was like, I'm so sorry. He said, I watched it all on my Ring camera. I saw every single detail, 5:15 in the morning. Guy pulls up. He's smoking a cigarette, gets out of his car, jimmies the door of my pickup, opens it up, and in 7 minutes, totally cleans out everything into his car, drives away. He said, you want to know the really sad thing? Not throwing any rocks, he said. But at 5:50, my neighbor, where my pickup was parked in front of his house, right across the court, comes back from his run. He'd been out running, and he comes running, and he sees my pickup. All the doors flung wide open. The back is wide open. Everything's open. There's stuff spilled out on the ground, the junk that the guy didn't want. And he stood there for a minute and just kind of looked around. And what? Went straight back into his house. Didn't go knock on the door and go, hey, you want to come out here and see what happened with your pickup? It's just like, it's somebody else's problem. I'm just not going to get involved. But what if the very best outcomes when things in life go badly, or when the stressors of life are at their peak, or when the storms of life are raging around us or in us, isn't just about whether or not we get through it? But what if the very best outcomes, actually the outcomes that God intends for every single one of us, are all about the people you bring with you safely through to the other side of it all? Because what happens is when the stressors pile on, when the circumstances are way outside of our control, when any semblance of control, as a matter of fact, slips through your grasp, the question ought not just be, am I going to make it through? The real question is, and I'm saying it again, who are you helping see through safely to the other side of it all? That's why what we're talking about today matters so very much. And the story of today's message isn't just that storms happen in life. The headline of the thing we're talking about today isn't just that sometimes things in life go badly. You knew that already. You didn't have to wake up and come into this room to know that sometimes life goes badly. Speaking of life going badly, a friend told me the other day she was standing in the checkout line at the Whole Foods over in Roseville the other day. And Whole Foods is just like a whole sacred space for suburban anxiety anyway, right? It's just a thing. And she said, right, because they're going to take your whole paycheck, right? That's what it really should be called. Whole Foods equals whole paycheck, right? And this lady, my friend, is making polite conversation with the woman in front of her in the checkout line. And the lady who was in front of her in the checkout line was very, can I say this? Was very careful to weave into the conversation that she lived in Granite Bay. Like she's from Granite Bay, like behind some gates, over in the big gated Granite Bay area, right? I'm from Granite Bay, so that, they're chatting along, they're bonding over kale or whatever you bond over in the line at Whole Foods. I don't know. And they realized that the line hadn't moved, hadn't even budged. Right about then, the manager of the whole thing walks out, very serious, kind of, hey, ladies and gentlemen, if I could get your attention for just a moment, I'm so sorry. The entire register system is offline. Have you ever had this happen to you, by the way? I've never been in a grocery store when the whole register system went offline. He says, we're working on it. It's just going to take a few minutes. We'll get it back online and get you out of here. And right, stuff happens in life. We know this. And a normal person would just sort of sigh, check their phone, look at the printed material that talks about how many alien babies Elvis had or whatever that they have at the checkout line. Right? What can you do? You shrug your shoulders like, whatever. Not Granite Bay lady, though. Instead, my friend told me that this lady let out, I hope she's not here today. She let out this, or not watching online, let out this dramatic, soul-deep sigh, and she rolls her eyes like somebody canceled her entire spa day or something, and mutters loud enough for every single person in the whole front area of the store to hear, I just feel like I'm in a third world country, she said. Are you kidding me? You're in Whole Foods. You live behind gates in Granite Bay. There's $9 protein bars over there, artisanal soaps over there, 37 different kinds of hummus over there, right? This isn't even life going badly. This isn't even a storm. This is a Wi-Fi glitch in a luxury grocery store, for crying out loud. Has this woman even ever traveled to the developing world? Not a chance. But actually, sometimes life does go badly, right? You know that. Sometimes life is challenging. Storms do rage. Stressors do pile on. Again, you didn't have to show up here today to hear that. But the thing that we must, and I mean must, reckon with is that when things do go badly, when stressors of life pile on, when storms rage, they reveal something about us, don't they? In that crucible of everything around us falling apart, everything around us melting down, everything around us crumbling in on top of us, who we are, what we trust in the most, whether our faith is built just for comfort or is our faith built for rescue, gets revealed right there. So let's get into this passage, longest introduction ever. Did you pack a lunch for church today? Good heavens. First of all, I want us to have in our hearts and minds this little scene from last week's passage, if you remember. So the story is, if you're just joining us, the Apostle Paul, who's one of the early leaders of the early church of Jesus Christ in the first century. He's on a ship. He's headed for a city. What city is he headed for? He's going to Rome. Why is he going to Rome? To stand trial before? He's going to Rome to stand trial before Caesar. But they've been waylaid. Numerous times they've been waylaid. It's not easy for them to get to Rome. It hasn't been a smooth sail at all. Why? Because they've been in a storm, a constant storm. What sea, by the way? On the Mediterranean Sea. It's a bad storm. It's a really bad storm. So much so that all the sailors, everybody on this giant ship, they think they're actually going to die. It's that bad. And listen to what Paul says to every single person on this ship. He gathers them together. But now he says, I urge, and this is an interesting play on the Greek here. You see how it's the lowercase UR and the capital GE, it still means the same thing, but just a little new expression. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because what? Because not one of you will be, imagine, just put yourself on that ship and go, we're probably going to die. This is not going well. And then this God guy, the Apostle Paul, gathers everyone together and says, just in case you're wondering, not one of you are going to be lost. Could you imagine the assurance, the reassurance that would breathe into your soul? And then he goes on. There's a semicolon right here, and then things get a little messy. Sure, none of you are going to be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed, right? So the ship, it's going to get wrecked, but none of you. And could you see them doing the math? They're like, how's that going to work? Right? And how do I know this, he says. Last night, an angel of God to whom I belong. Isn't that just so incredibly powerful? If you're in Christ, if you're a follower of Jesus, you don't belong to yourself, you don't belong to your spouse, you don't belong to anybody, you don't belong to your parents, you ultimately belong to God. You are in the care and in the possession and in the overwatch of Almighty. You belong. You are His. We are His. And whom I serve came and stood beside me on this very boat, the one that's going to be destroyed. He was here, and he said, do not be afraid. Another remarkable breath of encouragement across the sailors' souls. Paul, you must stand trial before Caesar. It's in the missional drive of the Church of Jesus Christ and the gospel that you're actually going to make it all the way to Rome. You are indeed going to stand trial before Caesar. That's where this whole story is going to end up. God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. They're in your care, Paul. God's got all of us. The ship absolutely is going to break, but guess what? All of us, we're not going to. All right, after another very long introduction, now we're into this week's passage. Acts 27, starting in verse 27. Are you there? On the, what number is that? Say it louder. 14. On the 14th night, we were still being what? Being driven. And he doesn't mean being driven all cushy and comfortably with the captain or the pilot firmly ensconced in the captain's chair at the helm of the ship. Who was driving? What was driving? The storm was driving. The storm was in charge. The storm was calling all of the shots all the way across the Adriatic Sea. That is not where they were trying to. They weren't trying to get all the way across the Adriatic Sea. Absolutely not. 14 nights they've been driven across the Adriatic Sea. 14 nights. How many weeks is that? 2 weeks. Darkness, rain, wind, waves, fear upon fear upon fear upon fear. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking how me, and probably most of us, we don't necessarily do 14 nights really well, do we? We don't do 14 nights of darkness, rain, wind, waves, storms, stressors piling on, life going badly, do we? When life goes badly, when stressors pile on, when the storms of life rage, what do we want? We want it to be over, like, how fast? Well, if you're watching a sitcom in 30 minutes, right? If you're watching a movie in about an hour and, 54 minutes or so is about perfect time to go from problem, solution, resolution, happily ever after, right? And that's how we want things to go in our lives. Can we just have it be the story arc of a movie or the story arc of a television show? We go like, God, I prayed yesterday. Can I please get this solved today? Will you FedEx the solution in, please? We want a microwave in a very crock-pot world, right? But how many of you know that storms never move on our timeline? Rarely ever do they move on our timeline. And lots of us live in seasons of waiting and weeping and wondering that stretch out way, way, way longer than we think we can possibly handle, which is why this one little phrase inside this one little verse matters so much, because it ought to remind us that God doesn't always end storms quickly. He doesn't always remove the stressors of life immediately. When life is going badly, He doesn't always solve them immediately, but God does stay with us in the storms completely. Amen. God hadn't abandoned Paul. God hadn't lost track of their ship. It wasn't like, whoa, where is that? Where is that? Well, if I could find that. God wasn't doing that at all. This is not a surprise. This is not breaking news to God. And the promise that God had made to them via Paul, it was still in operation. God was in control on night 1 of the storm. He was still in control on night 14 of the storm. Slow does not mean forgotten. Delayed does not mean denied. God is still at the helm, absolutely. And if He said you will make it through, you're going to make it through. When about midnight, the storm goes on, another one of these little unique Greek things going on here, right? About midnight, the sailors sensed. Interesting, right? It's like they had this special sailor spidey, like I smell the shore, right? We were approaching land. These are seasoned sailors. They can just tell, like, it feels like, smells like, kind of looks like the water's doing a certain thing. And so they did this thing called, they took a sounding, right? This was long before sonar, they couldn't just push the button and go boom, boom, boom. They didn't have that. So they would drop this big lead weight down attached to this big rope, and it would have the fathoms. A fathom, by the way, is 6 feet. And they would drop it down, it would hit the bottom, and then they would take the measurement like the water is, and they noticed that the water was how many feet deep? 120 feet deep, which probably tells them they're not out in the middle of the Adriatic Sea anymore, right? They're getting close to land. Their spidey sailor sense was right. A short time later, they took another sounding again, found it was how many feet deep? 90 feet deep, which means they're getting what? closer and closer and closer to shore, fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, because this is what happened to ships in the first century when they got too close to shore. Matter of fact, it still happens to this very day. So what'd they do? They dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight, the text said. Right, what are they trying to do? Why are they dropping multiple anchors off the back of the ship? Because if they're drifting toward the rocks, they're going to drop anchors back, drop one there. It didn't quite grab. You've been on a boat. You've felt this. It didn't quite grab. It kept going toward the shore. They're going to drop another one. Maybe it will grab. Doesn't quite grab, maybe a little. They end up throwing 4 anchors to try to slow the thing down and stop it from being dashed against the rocks. And then I love the Bible. Some people say the Bible's like boring, nothing interesting ever happens in the Bible. This is filled with conniving intrigue, right? Watch this. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they're going to lower some anchors from the bow. They get permission from the captain or from the pilot, whoever was in charge on that watch. They're like, yeah, we're going to go down, but they're fully going to abandon the ship. They're trying to bail out early. Chickens. They're trying to get off of the thing. The very opposite of the thing we're talking about today. They're trying to save their own skin. They're trying to look out for number one. They're trying to leave everyone else behind. But look what happens. Paul steps in. Paul sees. Paul knows exactly what's going on. You think about there's sort of 3 groups on this ship. You've got Paul and at least Luke and who knows how many other Christ followers in the little entourage who are with Paul on his way to Rome. So you got this little Christian cohort here. And then you have a cohort of the sailors who this is their ship. They do this day in, day out. This is their work. This is what they do. Giant grain ship. They haul grain to feed the hungry Roman Empire, right? From Alexandria in Egypt across all the way to Rome to keep the hungry peasants fed, everybody fed in the empire. And then the third group on the ship, which they aren't often there, you have the soldiers, right? Led by the centurions. You've got this Roman regiment there. You've got the Christians. And you have the sailors, and it's like, man, who is going to actually be the ones who understand what's really going on here? Paul says to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men, what? Stay with the ship. Don't let them off. Because this isn't just every man or every person for themselves. Unless they stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. And so the soldiers do a thing that the sailors had to have been totally freaked out by. They cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and they let it drift away. And the sailors are like, now we're really sunk. Because they forgot. They forgot the promise that Paul made. Remember, guys, God actually showed up here last night and he told me we're all going to be fine. We just have to stay together. Paul knows that panic makes people do impulsive things. Fear causes people to run when we ought to stay. And doggone it, we do the same thing today, don't we? When life goes badly, when stressors are at their peak, when storms in our lives rage, what do? We cocoon. We isolate. Like a turtle in its shell, just like, like just me. We quit the relationship. We leave the church. We emotionally check out. We bail. We walk out the door. We leave everybody behind. But listen to me, please. Storms are not the time to make escape plans. Do not ever think that you can just jump off of a ship in the dark. Because storms are best survived in community, not in isolation. We weren't made to be lone rangers just going at it like, I got this, I got this. Famous last words, I got this. No, you don't. You never just got this. And when you're riding shotgun with somebody through a hard season, through a storm, through life going badly, sometimes the very most spiritual thing you can ever say to somebody in that situation is just to tell them, will you just stay put? Will you just not run? Will you please just not quit? I'm going to put my arm around you and we are going to get through this, what? Together. I'm going to help make sure you get to the other side, that you arrive on the other side of this safely. This isn't just about each individual person, everybody for themselves. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, this very bold statement, right? He calls them out with this boldness. It isn't strategy, it's solidarity. It's not just self-preservation. Survival for all of them depended on everyone sticking together. This was our storm. This isn't just my storm. This isn't just your storm. This is our storm. And Paul's going, if you're not all okay, my work here is not yet done. And that ought to be the way we think day in and day out. When someone's marriage is sinking, check in with them. Don't check out and go like, oh, they're going to be fine. When somebody you know is struggling, don't just assume that they're going to be fine, that it'll all work out, that it'll all be okay. When you see somebody who's trying to carry grief alone, go get alongside them. Carry some of it with them. Let me bear your burden with you. In verse 33, Paul does an amazing thing. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to what? Oh, jeez. Wow. Urged them all to eat. Take and eat. For the last 14 days, he said, 2 weeks, you have been in constant suspense, fight or flight, hanging in the balance. Are we going to live or are we going to die? And you guys know this. When you're in fight or flight, what happens? Your appetite is the first thing that goes away. Not even close to hungry. They haven't been thinking about food because they're just surviving. You've been in constant suspense, have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one, and he reminds them again, guys, remember what God said. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. God knows the very count of hairs on your head. You're not even going to lose a single hair from your head. After he said this, see if this sounds familiar. He took some bread and he gave thanks to God in front of all of them. And then what did he do? He broke it and he began to eat. And they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. This amazing moment when the invocation of the reminder that God's got you mixed with some carbohydrates raised the blood sugar, and they were greatly encouraged as they ate. And altogether there were 276 on board. When they had eaten, look at this, as much as they wanted. I bet that was a lot. 276 people not eating for 2 straight weeks. I'll bet there's a lot of food. They ate a lot, and then they finished lightening the ship by throwing the rest of the grain, the rest of what would have been their profit, if they had made it to their eventual destination of Rome. They just we got to get rid of every last thing that we don't need anymore. And this is a bit shocking, actually, because the storm's still raging, the boat's still creaking, death still feels inches away, and yet Paul stands up and he's like, we got to eat, guys. Breaks bread. Thanks God. Passes out food. By the way, this is quite a little lesson on apologetics, frankly, and meeting people in the place where they are at. Right? When we think about sharing our faith with people, we're like, there's these people. And you imagine a bunch of first century sailors on the Mediterranean Sea. That's a bunch of people who probably are far from God, wouldn't you say? All the stereotypes of the sailors and what they do on the ship and what they do in shore when they're off of the ship. And some people go like, man, these guys, they just need Jesus, right? But Paul doesn't stand up. He doesn't preach a sermon, right? Yes, they absolutely need Jesus, but they need food first because hungry stomachs have no ears for the gospel. This is very quiet, powerful act of faith. This isn't a permanent fix to all of their problems. Here, have some bread. Everything will be... No. It's not a rescue, but you know what it is? This is a surrender. That's what this is. It's an admission of who's really in control that provides an immediate burst of strength because God's in charge. quite mirroring Jesus himself hanging on the cross. After everything he endured, betrayal and beatings and nails, what's he say? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Not, oh, I'm giving up, oh, I'm throwing in the towel, oh, it's all over, woe is me. No. God, I trust you completely, totally, entirely. Verse 39, when daylight came, they didn't recognize the land. They didn't know exactly where they were, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach. Doesn't that sound lovely? On the other side of a storm, a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. So they cut loose those 4 anchors that they threw off the back. They left them in the sea at the same time. They untied the ropes that held the rudders. They're just trying to literally hold this whole boat together. It's so beat up. Untie the rudders. They hoisted the foresail to the wind, which means the wind is at the back of the ship, and it's going to drive them via that sail straight onto that sandy beach. They're like, man, we're just going to run this thing right onto that beach. Save everybody. And made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar first and ran aground. The bow stuck fast, wouldn't move. The stern was broken to pieces. The back of the boat, by the pounding of the surf, just wailed on it. The thing was falling apart at the seams. The soldiers, these are Roman soldiers, right? They die if any of the prisoners get away. That's just the way it worked in the Roman Empire. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life. He knew that there was something to this God-man Paul. And he kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could. So this is quite a statement, right? This is the first century because the children, they weren't going off to swimming lessons at the swim center or at Lifetime to learn how to swim. There were people, lots and lots of people, sailors on the ship who couldn't swim. There were some, but not all of them. Weren't going to swimming lessons in the first century. Who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest, watch this, were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship that had come apart at the seams. In this way, everyone reached land. What's the last word? Say it again. Safely. The ship is broken apart. Everyone's saved. Some of them swam. A whole bunch of them floating on the wreckage. Because here's what's true. Every one of us is a follower of Jesus Christ. You know what's true? We're carried along by the very thing that's broken, aren't we? Luke 22:19, the words of Jesus, the actions of Jesus. He took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you." A guy named Brendan Manning wrote an incredible book. It's called The Ragamuffin Gospel. The beginning of the book starts by declaring that the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the truth that the one and only Son of God named Jesus lived life to show us what life his way looked like, and then died on the cross to pay the penalty of sin for all of humanity, to make the way for us to be able to know God and spend forever and ever with him in heaven someday. The good news, the gospel, is for what Manning calls the bedraggled and the beat up and the burnout and the broken. And Manning goes on to write this beautiful book. You have to read this book if you haven't read it. He insists over and over and over again that Jesus Christ came not for the strong or the polished or the religiously impressive. He said Jesus came for the ragamuffins. That's what he calls us. The ragamuffins. Or, watch this, those who are aware of their own desperate need. Luke spends an entire chapter at the end of the book of Acts writing one long story about one shipwreck. Right? He could have shortened it up to just a few words, and everybody made it safely to shore, and he could have moved on. He treats massive miracles in the book of Acts with 2 little words, that's all. But why? Why a whole chapter here? Because Luke wants to underscore this truth that it's the broken pieces, not the intact ship that God uses to save us. Manning's whole premise is that God doesn't save us in spite of our brokenness, but rather God, listen to this, saves our souls for eternity through our brokenness. And isn't it just true that the cross of Jesus Christ is the most ultimate broken thing you can possibly imagine? And so is our heart broken, so is our past broken, so is our story broken. And Acts 27 is the living, breathing metaphor of the Ragamuffin Gospel's opening note that grace, the grace of God, means that all of our shipwrecks, and raise your hand if there's something in your life that is a shipwreck. Come on, raise your hand if there's something in your life that is a shipwreck. Yes. Our shipwrecks, my shipwrecks, are not the end, but rather they're just the beginning. Because salvation doesn't come through impressive things that we build ourselves, but rather it comes from the broken things that God redeems and restores. We're saved not by holding the ship together, but by holding onto the splinters of grace that God has scattered throughout the wreckage. Grace never comes floating in on a massive Carnival Cruise Line cruise ship. Rather, the grace of God drifts in on the debris of all of the broken things. Can I just ask you to close your eyes and bow your heads if you would? Because I want to give you a chance to commit your life to Jesus right here, right now, today. Maybe you've never received the ultimate grace and forgiveness and unconditional love of Jesus Christ. Maybe you don't know that you're going to go to heaven, but you want to be sure. I want to pray with you right now to receive Him. If that's you, I'd invite you to pray with me a prayer that goes something like this. I invite you to pray with me. Lord, I give you my life. Lord, I know that I'm broken. I know that my story is broken. I know that my past is broken. I know that a whole bunch of my right now is very broken, and that I'm a sinner. Jesus, I ask that you would please forgive me. I believe in you. I believe you died on the cross. I believe that you rose from the grave. I believe that you did it because you love me that much. And Jesus, I turn from my sin and I turn to you as Savior. Help me live for you as Lord. Now listen, stay in that posture if you would, please. Because listen to me. That moment, that decision, that prayer is the most significant decision you'll make in your entire life. That's it. It's such a big deal that around here we invite people to tell us when they make that decision. Not in a weird, embarrassing, nothing crazy is going to happen. Just as a way for us to pray for you and stand with you in your decision to trust Christ and follow Jesus. And so here's how this is going to work. Heads bowed, eyes closed, no one's looking around this room. In just a moment, don't do it yet. In just a moment, if you prayed with me just then, I'm going to invite you to do a really brave, bold thing, and that's just slip your hand up and lock eyes with me. Don't do it yet. In just a moment, I'll invite you to. Just so that we can acknowledge that transaction. You and Jesus today, forever, entering into the grace and forgiveness and mercy of God that came in on the wreckage of the cross of Jesus Christ because of his love for you. If you prayed with me just then, are you ready? On the count of three, I'm just going to invite you to slip your hand up and lock eyes with me. 1, 2, 3. You can do it right now. Yeah, right there. Just hold them up high and lock eyes with me if you would. I don't want to miss it. Yeah, to my left. Hold them up. I see both of you. Way to go. And you, sir. Yes. And you too. I see you, and I see you, and I see you, and I see you. Yes. Way to go. And right here, I see you. Yes. And I see you. Absolutely. Yes. Way to go. And way to go. Just make sure I catch your eye. I don't want to miss anybody. Yes. And yes. Yes. And yes. Way to go. And way to go. I'm so, and you too. So proud of you. Way to go. And and you too, sir. Yes. Way to go. And way to go. Anyone else? Did I miss? Yeah, I see. Absolutely. Way to go. And yes. And yet right here. And right here. And right here. Yes. And yes. And in the back. Absolutely. You can put your, yes, sir. Absolutely. Yes. You can put your hands down. Jesus. Thank you so much. that your grace abounds. And we don't know what else to do when the storms rage, when life goes badly, when the stressors pile on, that's the place you meet us over and over and over again. And God, I pray that you would send us out into this world to be the people who, just like Paul, who in the way of Jesus, who actually just aren't out for our own skin, looking out for us, that we would be people who are helping see people through to the other side safely, Jesus, in you. And that especially means heaven, Jesus. Help us live on the mission day in and day out of filling heaven as our primary purpose. It's why we're here. Help us do that. Jesus, we love you. It's in your name we pray all of this. And everyone agreed together and said, amen. Come on, can we celebrate these friends who stepped into life in Christ today?